Thank you for coming to another one. Um, Today, I will be presenting on research that I did back when I was an undergrad student at the University of Wyoming. Um, this was based off of a poster and paper I did, which I titled Variation of Cutmarks on Bison Ribs from the Vore Buffalo Jump. So just in case you're new and you don't know who I am, um, I like to do outlines before presentations. I'll go through who I am, who I exactly am. I'm going to share a little bit about the site, why I decided to research Cutmarks, what happened within my research, possible further research that I personally would like to explore, but if anybody else would like to explore it, I'd love to root for you. And then I'll do some closing remarks. First of all, who am I? I first graduated with an associate's degree from Casper College and then moved swiftly, as one does in Wyoming, to the University of Wyoming to get my Bachelor's of Arts in Anthropology. I decided to work for a year here, and then I said I want more school, so I went overseas to get a master's degree in osteoarchaeology, and I focused on human remains specifically. But of course, it all kind of sparked with my love for bones back at UW. Currently, I am employed here at the Archaeological Research Center, where I kind of just plan to stay because I love it so much. I'm going to share with you a little bit about the Vore Buffalo Jump. This is a local site, and one thing that should be known about this site is that it has a massive collection. This site was first discovered back when the interstate was being built in the 90s. While they were doing drilling down into the sinkhole to see if it was stable, they came up with a bunch of bone. So archaeologists George Frizen and Charles Rare were called out to investigate. And out of this first investigation, they did a deep trench to see just how deep the bone went. From that trench, they were able to pick up 22 distinctive layers of bone, and they excavated just in total from that trench over 4 tons of bone. Now, from the layers, this can be traced back to the late 1500s, all the way up to the early 1800s. They just did a new carbon date this year, where they found an exact date, but we're also questioning it because radiocarbon dates that are exact are not what you see every day. So we're probably going to look back into that. That radiocarbon date showed that this last hunt, the very top layer of bone, was done in the mid-1800s. We found from the layers that most of these hunts were carried out during the fall. This is when the bison are fattening themselves up for the winter, and they're getting their pelts really nice and thick, so they're getting the thickest fur so that they can stay warm over the winter. This place is also surrounded by so many natural resources, so many different food resources, choke cherries being one of them. When I worked there as a tour guide, and when those choke cherries were in full season around end of June, early July, we'd pluck one from a tree, eat it, and if people asked me if it was poisonous, I'd say yes. So then we get down into the sinkhole, and I'd probably make them nervous to see if I would drop dead or not. These trees right here are some of the choke cherry trees. It's wonderful. We're also really close to a natural clean water creek called Sand Creek, but the Redwater River is also close by. So different areas for probably the ideal camp to be at. Throughout this site's history, it's been excavated multiple times. However, It's also been used multiple times by multiple groups of people. Tribes, as far as the Arapaho, the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, um, along with many others, Arikara, Mandan, Hidatsa, utilize the site. And we can usually look at that through oral tradition and what tribe affiliates themselves the most with the site. The Cheyenne actually affiliate themselves the most with the site, and we do see from our records of the layers that they were the longest users of this sinkhole as a bison jump. In a way, the site is still used mostly as for educational purposes. Every summer, the site opens up with a seasonal staff, and of course, if you went on a tour to the Vore Buffalo Jump, you'll see that everything's kind of formatted in like a little history museum section in the teepee, and then we make our way down into the sinkhole where the bone bed is. It's probably my favorite part of the entire site. The site is truly what one former graduate student of the University of Wyoming said, which is, Vore is an optimal site for the study of faunal remains because of the site's repeated use by several different indigenous tribes. When I first worked at this site, when I first looked at the collection for this site, I thought it was too much. I realized that this is probably an archaeologist's nightmare because it is so much of an assemblage that you have no idea what to do with it except study it bit by bit. So now moving on to why specifically research Cutmarks. This all started out as a class project. In my undergrad, we had an archaeological research methods class, which required us to do a sort of mini version of a research project. So I started out with a gigantic, broad question, and I had to narrow it down. All I knew is that I wanted to work with bones because I love bones. I later got my master's degree in bones, so that's what I told my teacher. And I remember telling my teacher that I wanted to focus on something specifically on how people butchered bison. He said that's too much. That's a PhD question. So he had me format my question into this tree of questions. So I branched or truncated out to what makes up a toolkit in somebody's butchering kit. Then I later went out into can I find the difference between tools from the Cutmarks? And then finally I nailed on my question, which was, what is the variation of Cutmarks? Because if I can find out the variation, or if there is any variation, perhaps I can use that research to conduct more in the future. So this is just a small picture of the rib bones that I got to look at. I think over the course of a semester, I looked at a little over 100 rib bones specifically, because they are the ones that seem to have the most prevalent clear cut marks within the assemblage. All of them were also in the middle of being cataloged. Remember that there's 4 tons of bone that were pulled up out of this site. This takes up an entire section in the repository, this entire site does. And even today, they're still in the middle of cataloging the collection over numerous excavations throughout the years. Through a regular field camera, I was able to take kind of these more macroscopic photos of Cutmarks, which helped me out later on for Cutmark identification. Took this quote from Eglund. Cutmarks observed in archaeofaunal assemblages are an important source of evidence in the reconstruction of prehistoric butchery strategies, which, of course, was the thing that I wanted to focus on. I wanted to see how these people were butchering bison. So I'm going to move into my research. Within this research, I decided to photograph and record lengths and widths of cut marks from these bones. And then I would divide them into two distinct categories, singular and cluster cut marks. Using a Dynalite camera, which is the camera that's pictured right here, I was able to take these microscopic photos where I could get an exact measurement of the length and the width of the cut mark that was presented to me on the bone. I would then be able to compare these cut marks with newly gathered visual data and investigate the question, what is the variation of cut marks? I'm just going to show you a couple of the, photos that I think turned out really great. Dynalite camera is pretty cool. I convinced our office to buy two somehow. I personally really like it because I think you can get, it's a relatively cheap microscope, and with even the amount of money that you spend, you can get some pretty good quality photos, and I'm pretty cheap, as I've been taught by my parents. So I enjoy
frugal.
Yeah. I enjoy something that is low cost but still delivers a very good image. This is an example of one of my singular cut marks. I pretty much measured as best as I could the exact length of the cut mark and then got a little bit of the width. The way I was able to do this is I'm actually able to pinpoint where the image is different from the rest of the image around it. So it kind of locks on to a location, and then it's able to lock on to another one. That's why I brought this. And then it's able to lock on to another one at the other end of it. For the width, I did the same thing. I just took the width from either side of the cut mark. Here's another example. This is an example of a cluster cut mark. Notice compared to the singular one, the cluster one is fairly wide, which makes sense. That's why I gave it the name cluster. And I see that as a trend throughout all of these cut marks. Here's an example of a singular. It's very defined. The Vore site is known for also using metal tools. As we know from the past in my presentation, it was used up into the 1800s. So things like metal points and even modern knives would have been used to process bison at this site. It's another double, it's like a double feature. I had to do some statistics because what is school without statistics? And as you can see, it's sort of random. I knew that would be the case because, as someone who is not really gone hunting, doesn't really know much about hunting, must be one of the only South Dakotans in South Dakota that has not hunted. For me, it would be random. There would be no definitive pattern. I do see throughout, though, my favorite kind of plot, which is a scatter plot, shows these almost a small linear connection compared to width with cluster cut marks and length with singular cut marks, where I started to think with these singular cut marks, they're probably only doing one incision on something, probably only cutting maybe a tendon or something that's not that tough to get through. A tendon would be tough, wouldn't it? Ignore me. And of course, I had to do box and whisker plots because that's something my teacher liked. although I do think that these show a pretty good representation of what my outliers look like. Those outliers, of course, are the dots. I don't know why I picked blue and orange. I think they're just the preset colors. But these dots right here represent the outliers of different measurements within the collection. When I was doing my overall research for this, I wanted to see if anybody else had also looked into something like this, and goody for me, somebody did. Lemke actually looked into different ways of categorizing cut marks, and she started calling them based on how they looked, how they were grouped, and where they were located, as 4 different types of cut marks. And these are gash, which is to the top left. Slice, which is to the top right. Nick to the bottom left, and wedge to the bottom right. Throughout this, I decided to kind of go back, look at the cut marks that I photographed, and go, okay, is this an example of, let's say, a slice? Seems thin enough. It's following the same characteristics as what Lemke has. Is this one following the same characteristics as a gash, or is it more like a wedge? That was something that was running through my mind. Same thing here. Are we looking at something like a nick? This all turned into what my brain originally wanted to do, which was more research on it. So that's what brings me to further research. All the photos that you see in the background, by the way, were new photos taken this year. You can see my dad right there helping out with some survey at the Vore site. This is taken by a friend of mine, Mackenzie de la Plata. She took all of these beautiful images of the Spearfish Formation region, the Black Hills. We need to go back into the tree of questions before I talk about further research. Of course, it all ended up in what is the variation of cut marks. I wanted to know what makes up a toolkit. And then, of course, my overall question that I wanted to explore was, how did people butcher bison? From the research that I did in my undergrad, what is the variation? I started formatting more questions after that. It became a little bit more clear, but it was also very clear that there were still so many more steps to take. One of these questions that I would like to see pursued, or I would like to see me do perhaps in the future, is, can I differentiate metal tools from stone tool created cut marks? I even looked today, and I think I found someone. I did find someone who had tried to see if there was a difference, and they went through a method of experimental archaeology. I think that's another reason why I would like to do further research, because I want to actually cut some bone myself. But like what these researchers were doing that I just looked up, I wanted to find out, can I match the cut mark to the tool? Is that possible? Can I match the mark to a biface specifically? Can I match it to a flake? That was one of my biggest questions, so if that could be done. If I were to do this, if anybody else were to do this, that would be fine too. I would like to use experimental archaeology like these researchers that I just looked up. I would also like to measure and analyze the cut marks using a scanning electron microscope, or called SEM. But that was when I knew about SEM. Now I know about this other thing that's called geometric morphometrics, which is what these researchers did. The researchers have a 2023 paper titled An Experimental Approach to the Analysis of Altered Cut Marks in Archaeological Contexts from Geometrics Morphometrics. So definitely, if you want to know more about the article, I have the citation here with me. So if you're interested, let me know. I think even reading throughout their research, they were kind of able to do what I wanted to do, which was connect them to a tool that was used to create the cut mark. But of course, this is all under experimental archaeology, which can sometimes skew your results. Finally, some closing remarks. Here's the crew after a fun survey. Mm-hmm. Here we go, was falling off the mountain. Hopefully tonight I've given you a little bit of information on the Vore Buffalo Jump. If you haven't already visited the Vore Buffalo Jump, definitely go visit it. It's not too far away. It's a very significant piece of archaeological data within our region. Hopefully I've also given you a little idea on identifying cut marks. I showed you a lot of pictures of what cut marks look like. And that's the way that I learned how to identify cut marks, is just looking at hundreds and hundreds of bones with cut marks. And then I really do want to put out there the research potential with this site alone. There's so much within this assemblage that has yet to be tapped. And we even, the University of Wyoming has a Vore scholarship program for students who are interested. I'm saying this in the hope that maybe somebody's watching and going, oh, I might be interested in that, where you can actually go and catalog the bone from the site, which helps out the University of Wyoming, but it also helps further the knowledge on the collection. These are some of my resources for a full breakdown on the resources I use. Contact me directly if you wish, if you really want to. Then I just really like to thank all of these people. A lot of these people helped me out in my undergrad years, and a lot of these people are still helping me today. So that's all I have for you. Thank you. Yes.
The cut marks that you looked at, were these typically at the terminal proximal end of the rib or throughout the rib itself?
That's a good question. They varied wildly, depending, although I did see a pattern later on, depending on the sequence of ribs. So let's say the rib that's closest to the head would have more cut marks closer to the sternal end of the rib, whereas ones further down, so more around like the thoracic region of the spine, would have ones all throughout the bone. So it would be on the inside or on the medial side, so like that's the inside of the bone, on the outside, on the shaft of the rib.
So would you interpret that as getting the capes?
Probably.
And the other would be getting the meat.
Yeah. Like specifically because I also had to look into how butchery of a bison was done, at least through different oral traditions that were recorded back in the 1800s, still done the same way typically today, where of course the pelt is fully removed first. That's the number one thing taken. And then the next thing that you want to attack is the organ meats, because that's where all the vitamins, all the nutrients are located. So most likely also, imagine you're in a hot hole at the end of fall here in the Black Hills. You know how hot that gets, especially when you're down with the rest of these bison, these carcasses that you still have to process, which by the way totaled in at least 150 to 200 per jump. And you have to process as much meat from the bison as possible. So you're really in this rush, even if you're like a skilled processor, you're really in a rush to get as much as you can of the valuable things first. So in my mind, I can kind of imagine people at the bottom, like really, not being, delicate. Why would you be? Just kind of not necessarily scrambling, but with haste, cutting out the bone, taking as much as possible. Yeah.
Did you any way to determine, like, say, the earlier carcasses? Did they have more marks than the more recent ones? I mean, as the people progressed and moved from stone tools to metal tools, did they become more efficient? Because I'm trying to understand is probably all of you, most of you butchered some kind of deer or elk, and we try not to actually hit the bone because it dulls the knife.
Right.
And so, why were they so many marks on the bones then?
I don't think it has much to do with efficiency as much as it has to do with the technology that you're using. So when I looked at the bones from the most previous jump from the 1800s, they didn't show any difference per se as to where marks were. Like, let's take cluster cut marks, for example. I didn't see any significant decrease in the amount of cluster cut marks from the rib bones, and I'm just talking about the rib bones too. So from the rib bones from that particular jump time, I did notice that perhaps the spaces where they were being cut were a little bit different, but the amount of cut marks presented did not show much of a difference. So I don't know if that was the answer.
Yeah, I have two. I hope
Okay.
I remember
Yeah.
the second one. The first question I have is, if it's 1500 to 1800,
Mhm.
I would have assumed that all of this butchering was done with metal knives. Does that a safe assumption?
Around 1800s, perhaps, but we don't see metal really appear, especially far out west past the Missouri, until if I was a historic archaeologist, I wouldn't be making an embarrassment of myself, but probably around the 16 or 1700s.
So you would have had examples of the stone cut marks as well as the metal
Yes,
utensils.
if I knew what they were,
Yeah.
if I could tell the difference between metal and stone,
Okay.
that's something I still would like to figure out. That was kind of in my further research section. I would like to see if there's a distinction between the two. I think I have read some articles where researchers have found a distinction between the two based off of just how exact and how deep. It's another thing is like the depth of the cut mark is also examined. And when you get metal tools, usually the depth is a lot deeper.
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure. The second question I have is, did you hold up the musculature of a bison next to the bones the ribs, for example, to see how those utensils were sliding through the meat?
I did on my own. I did watch a video on people butchering. I don't think it was a bison. I think it was like an elk or something. I think it was like a tutorial video on like how to butcher your elk. And I was like, okay, I've never done this before. That was kind of on me though. I have no prior knowledge in hunting, nor did I actively seek it out. Which now today I'm kind of seeing that as a flaw in my research. I really should have focused on hunting and processing practices.
But how you're cutting
Mhm.
would
Yeah.
maybe affect the.
Yeah, I also learned there's a video on YouTube from this YouTube channel called Meat Eater where they do experimental archaeology with stone tools. And I saw that they basically have a designated person who's constantly resharpening the stone tools over and over again. And when they get, one turns into this emaciated biface. They basically discard it and a new one is started. And this one guy, they had one guy basically do all of the lithic tools, and there was not a single moment where I think he stopped.
Yeah.
He was like kept on going, kept on resharpening, because of course if you're cutting onto the bone, like you said, you're dulling your blade.
Thank you.
So you were able to date individual rib bones?
Based off of the proveniences. The fun thing and not so fun thing about the Vore site, and I'm sorry if someone from Wyoming hears this, although they'll probably understand me, is that it is frustrating because Charles Rayer decided to do one recording style with George Frizen. And then the next year that they did an excavation, they decided to do another recording style with different measuring. So they went from, in the 70s, they went from measuring in feet to measuring in meters after that. And then in the 90s and 2000s, they did another recording that was more related to the modern way that we record sites today. But when you go through the site, you can definitely tell which ones from this layer and which ones from this layer, just based off of the provenience.
Okay.
A couple of questions, Kitty. One is I think I've missed where your sampling of the ribs came from. Was it one kind of level or period that the bones were thrown in?
No, it was multiple.
Okay.
Yeah. So it would have been, I think I tried to sample at least, did a little bit over 100. I tried to sample at least 10 or maybe a little bit less than 10 from each layer if they were presented. There are definitely some layers where I didn't get to record that layer because they hadn't gone through the collection and found a bone with those cut marks. Again, those the assemblage is still being taken out of its boxes from when it was excavated and now cataloged. So I really just had to work with what was available.
Certainly, I understand that. And were they separated? Were they separated and cataloged if they had a cut bone or no?
No, I had to kind of like fish through
Okay.
and look at a bunch.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Then that kind of goes into my next question. Did you have to look at bone that had been gnawed by
Yes.
other animals to see the difference between
Yeah.
an animal gnawing on the bone or biting
was-
the bone?
That was a big part of my research, was basically me learning how to differentiate rodent gnawing, root etching versus culturally made cut marks. By culturally made, I mean somebody went out there and purposely cut on the bone. It wasn't like, just an accident of someone going, whoopsie, I nicked this bone with, my cleat from soccer or something. It was more like somebody purposely cut the bone because they had that in their brain going, I'm going to do this.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's kind of what I was going to ask, is when the buffalo went down, a lot of them were dead, and maybe the natives might have been attacking him with spears or arrows, and those would leave marks also.
Definitely.
Especially in the rib area is probably where they were trying
Yeah,
to.
the center of mass.
Yeah.
And that's how some projectile points were found within the site. So they were sometimes still lodged within the bone. A lot of projectile points were recovered from the site. We still have yet to find a metal projectile point. However, only 10% of this entire site has been excavated. So if there is a metal one, it's still in the ground. There aren't any further plans to do any excavation because there's so much to go through. But it's probably all similar.
Thousands of years ago.
Yes.
What percentage of rib bones have cut marks?
What percentage out of the overall?
Yeah, when you look at 100 ribs,
Mhm. I would say close to 95%.
Wow.
I think, of course, I was also cherry picking, so I was trying to find the ones with cut marks. And over the boxes that I looked through, most of them had cut marks in at least one section of the rib. Fidel.
Are there any threats to the future? Are there any threats to the context of the site, whether environmental or whatever, or is it pretty stable?
It's pretty stable for now.
Okay.
I think through the drilling they found the preliminary drilling. Besides the bone, they found that the sinkhole was pretty much done sinking. The only problem that they have is that the area is very subsequent to erosion because it's surrounded by the spearfish formation, which pretty much is just all gonna eviscerate away at some point.
It's a big fat layer of gypsum.
Yeah.
all the way around.
And that stuff just goes when you look at it. So that's the only problem I think that they're facing with it. Not that it's a super big problem, because the only problem with that is that the hole's just gonna get like wide and it will get filled in. Because that's how the deposition worked with the different layers, that it eventually got filled in through erosion. So it's not going to be a huge problem. I think we'll all be dead by the time that happens, so I don't think we necessarily have to worry about it.
That's a good way to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You said 90% of the ribs you think have cut
Around
marks?
95%, I'd
That's-
say.
That's not terribly surprising for that site
Yeah.
because everybody gears up for this annual event
Mhm.
and you try to recover as much as you can. So I've worked on a lot of bison kills where you won't find a cut mark. Now, not all bison, we always think like killing bison, or they want the meat. Well, that's not always the most important part.
That's true.
The cakes can be, that's what saves your life.
Mhm.
That's your clothing. That's your structures.
Yeah.
That they need that probably more often than they need the meat.
Mhm.
So occasionally we'll find kill sites where you might find some around the lower limbs, but otherwise you're not going to see that. Plus, they also use bone tools too,
Mhm.
which won't show up
Exactly.
very
Yeah.
easily. I mean, you might see bone splinters, but to find the bone flakes, they work
It's pretty difficult.
very, very well for taking the meat off. Stone tools, because I butchered a lot of deer with stone and bone. And you need stone to essentially remove the cape. But after that, bone works just as well if you have good access to plenty of bone.
Which you
Also,
definitely do.
There's certain
Yeah.
lithic pipes that work better too. I've never had any luck with the biface. Always flakes.
Yeah, I saw that with the video that I watched, that people mostly used flakes.
Yeah.
Because that's like it's like a scalpel with a flake. It cuts nicely. Whereas a biface is more of like a
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, butcher knife sort of thing. But
Is there any data or an estimation, whether it be like from the archaeological record or from oral tradition, on how many people gathered for these hunting parties and these jump events?
when I look through the oral traditions, specifically from the Cheyenne account, they would talk about groups of around 200 people.
Okay.
And the idea was it was one bison per person. That was the general thought. That's how you could kind of quantify it. Of course, there's some leeway in there, perhaps. There's not going to be like an auditor in. I don't imagine an auditor in the tribe, although maybe there was. I don't know. And they were like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 1, 2. Like I don't know. I can't imagine someone doing that. In the hoopla of like manually pushing these bison to go over a cliff. But there are oral traditions of these groups being as big as the herd that they actively hunted.
Yeah, I just wonder that like pops another like branch in your research question tree in like my head, if you can like represent the amount of different individuals in like variation of Cutmark. Or maybe,
Cool. Maybe that should be your question. Go ahead, you got it. Yes.
So, a question for Mike.
Yeah.
So you're talking about butchering with bone.
Bone flakes.
Huh?
Just bone flakes. You break a bone and you got a nice sharp edge, especially the cannon bone. Or you can have them prepared beforehand too. If you know you're going to have a successful hunt, you can have all these. Well, typically, like here, I'm sure they had all their tools made well before they got there. And it's the same for most of the time you're going to be successful. It's not often where you just don't get anything at all. So you have these tools already pre-made.
Alex.
I'm sorry. This
You're
might
good.
we might be.
That's okay.
But I did want to know, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, like in those videos, how many tools did they have in their toolkit? I mean, not in terms of number, but variety, like
Right.
flakes, bifaces. What did they have in the video, or like that you saw from the experimental archaeological side to do this? And do you? I guess that's the first part.
I'll give you like a rough, like rounded to the nearest 0.5%. I would say around 60 or 65% would be flakes. Maybe a good 15 to 20 would be bigger flakes. I'm not sure if they were like bifaces, but they didn't look as worked. I would say most of the stuff was less worked than I expected. I'd say maybe they used 65 plus 20.
15%.
50%. Thank you. I would say like less than 10% would have been like tools like bifaces.
Like choppers or something.
Yeah, I like that would be like one within. I should also put in with the flakes scrapers. I think scrapers were one of the most used. Yeah, and then the last snippet, like 5% would be like.
I've found a lot of big choppers, and I don't know if that was intentionally used. I can't imagine. I mean, they're not doing surgery. They want they want to get it off.
Yeah.
And, you find these really crude ones that'll fit in your hand, and they're as big as your hand. I bet they were in there just stuff hard.
Yeah.
Every leg, but it wasn't surgery. It was getting.
Well, and they're relatively easy to make, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You just need to chop off.
One side of a round.
Yeah.
rock.
That's all you need. But I can't expect people to carry those around with them wherever
Oh, no.
they go.
And
So that's why I think there might be a lot in the
Yeah,
assemblages.
there are a lot of throwaways, that was a throwaway.
Yeah.
But, the ones I find are serrated, you know, people think of serrations
Oh,
as
yeah.
being something new, well, these guys were into serration.
Definitely doing that.
You know.
I hope Spencer doesn't trademark Powers 2, but the Powers 2 site, which is near Hartville, and Guernsey, Powers 2 has an example of serrated edges for smaller tools. It also has, I think there's like a weird bone tool that I'm really unsure of what it is, but it's also following the same characteristics as serration. Sorry, Spencer, if you're watching this.
Yeah, it's just,
Oh, sorry.
it's amazing that you just see these rocks out in the field and you think nothing of them until you
Yeah.
flip them over and here it is, just this huge serrated edge that long.
Yeah.
And that, you know, to be a pebble that's been in the creek or something, and it's perfect for your hand because you've got all the cushioning in the world. There's no cutting edge near you, but you can just take big chunks of stuff.
Yeah.
And you find a lot of those. I find a lot of them anyway.
Yes, and I just wanted to, I guess, clarify. So in the experimental paper that you talked about,
Yes.
they were actually able to connect different types of tools to specific cut marks after
Yes.
and that's just using what length, width,
Yeah, they
depth.
used
and type, like you were, or something similar to the Nick Gash
yeah,
kind of
they
system.
were not only were they also talking about Lemke, which is the Ashley Lemke, who is the person who came up with the different categories of cut marks, but they were also looking at the depth of the cut mark, which was outlined by their geometric morphometrics system. I'm not a big computer person, as you know, Allie. So all of this stuff would be kind of like, I would like to get into it because it does measure the depth.
Yeah.
I do think the Dynalight camera has the ability to do it. I'm just not skilled enough to do it. So as far as like these people go with using this method under experimental archaeology practices, I say for somebody who's probably just now getting into this question, I think it's fairly good representation. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, that you can take, like, I imagine that they're training some kind of a mathematical problem into existence, and then you take your cut mark, you measure length, width, depth, and then maybe do like a qualitative description.
Yeah, you probably plug
qualitative
that.
description, and
Plug
then
it into.
yeah, you just put it into the math problem,
Yep.
and it gives you whatever's most likely.
Highest
Yeah,
probability.
there's
Yeah.
specific programs for morphometrics.
Yeah.
You can use paleo. People use it all the time
Cool.
for identifying species. Lots of plans.
Cool. All right. Well, if you have any questions further on Vore or other research that I've done, if you want to know about my master's thesis, it's on a video on YouTube. So if you didn't see that one, go watch
And you can
it.
pretend to be in this room again.
Yeah, I'm wearing a different shirt. Yeah, that's all I have for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.